Hello everyone, my name is Joanna Costello. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary at the International Solar Energy Society, and I'll be taking you through the first few minutes of the introduction of today's webinar. So we're right on time, so we're going to start off, and I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you all as well for joining us today. And we're looking forward to this webinar, which is entitled International Use of the NREL System Advisor Model, SAM, with case studies. We're looking forward to all of your participation and questions in the Q&A session later. Before we begin with the webinar presentations, I would like to inform you a little bit about what the International Solar Energy Society is and what it stands for. So the International Solar Energy Society, ISIS, is a non-profit, UN-accredited membership NGO. The ISIS vision is to achieve 100% renewable energy for all, used efficiently and wisely. We represent a diverse membership of academics, researchers, energy practitioners, consultants, students, businesses, and advocates. ISIS works together with like-minded organizations from countries around the world to advance the renewable energy transformation. So I'd like you to have a look at our website at www.ises.org and our membership page, join.ises.org, and have a look at our membership opportunities. We'd love to welcome you to join us as a member, especially if you've already been watching a few of these webinars and like the work we do and would like to support us. Please have a look at our membership opportunities. We understand that sometimes the time of the webinar may not suit people in many parts of the world, and while we try to alternate the times of these monthly webinars to suit as many time zones as possible, it's not always possible. Therefore, we will post the recording of the webinar on the ISIS website and on our YouTube channel. So please log in with your password onto our website, and you will find the members area full of the recordings for members and the presentations, and you can also request a certificate of attendance if you're an ISIS member for these webinars. You are welcome and encouraged to ask questions at any time throughout this webinar. To ask a question, select Questions pane on your screen and simply type in your question. Please specify which of the panelists your question is directed to, and the questions will be addressed after each of the presentations in a Q&A session. We would also like to encourage you to use the ISIS discussion forum on LinkedIn to continue the Q&A even after the webinar has ended. Our moderator for today's webinar is Nate Blair. Nate is a group manager within the Strategic Energy Analysis Center at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, in Golden, Colorado. He will be giving a short introduction to today's webinar topic and also moderate the questions and answers session after all the presentations. So without further ado, I now hand over to you, Nate, and hope you all enjoy today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Joanna. We are very happy to be here. I'm going to introduce our panelists just quickly. Oh, first I'm going to show my screen. Then we'll get started. There are three of us here in Colorado, myself, Anthony Lopez, who will be speaking next, who coordinates a lot of our solar and wind resource activities on the geospatial side. James McCall, who has been actively working with SAM in Mexico, and then switching over to California. Sarah Turner will be talking about SAM and our use in India and our the participation of the SAM team somewhat in the Sirius project. And so those will be the four sort of subsets of the presentation. And I'll be going first, talking and introducing the SAM model. And I think we'll just dive right in. I'm going to move the question box out of the way here. So first of all, SAM stands for the System Advisor Model, and SAM sits within several different solar tools at NREL, and it can be confusing because over the years we've offered a number of different products, and the one that there are two that are really kind of more well known, the SAM model as well as the PV Watts model. And the PV Watts model is a system model as well, which produces performance metrics, typically on monthly and annual basis. And we won't be talking about PV Watts very much today, but we are happy to answer questions about that as well. So what is SAM? SAM is at its very core, and we'll talk about more details as we go forward, free software that enables the combination of two things. One is a detailed performance analysis, and the second follows up with a detailed financial analysis or a cash flow analysis for renewable energy systems. Right here, if you want to jump right into it, you can download SAM right now, sam.nrel.gov/download for the desktop version as we move forward. So what are the basic steps that you go through? What are the basic inputs that you need for SAM? On the left here, you see a series of inputs that you need to generate the electricity production of the SAM model. So weather data, and Anthony's going to talk more about what weather data we have available, but either for a solar system, a wind system, biomass system, etc., you need some kind of resource data. And what's a little bit unique about SAM is we typically require month or hourly resource data. So the weather data that we need is typically hourly. We can do sub-hourly, but SAM's not really set up to handle like annual average values as an input. You combine that with system specifications, and here we've created a bunch of default values, but there can be hundreds of system specification options, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then system losses, how are you losing energy as you go along? That gets you to electricity production, or in a few cases, thermal production, but generally electricity production. You then take that electricity production over the first year and push it to the cash flow model, where you combine it with costs for the system. And we have, in some cases, quite detailed cost models. Compensation, meaning what are you selling that electricity for? And then financing. If you're taking on debt for the system, what does that debt cost? What's the terms of that debt? Or if you're just doing equity, what does the return need to be for your equity? And then lastly, incentives. And then you end up with a whole series of results, thousands of results actually. And as you can see on the left-hand side, more of the kind of performance model results, annual, monthly, hourly, or sub-hourly outputs at different points of the system. And then a series of financial metrics, the levelized cost of energy, the net present value, the payback of the system, total revenue, the capacity factor of the system, which is also a performance metric. So we've got a number of metrics that are both at a high level, annual or system-wide metrics over the lifetime, all the way down to hourly or even sub-hourly outputs. And we have a variety of ways within the model that you can view those outputs as well. So what technologies are represented in SAM? That's one of the first questions we get typically. And over the years, we've started SAM in 2003. And over the years, we've had a lot of different models and different people interested in models. Currently, and most of the investment has been in two key areas. In photovoltaics, where we have the PV Watts model, which you can run within SAM as well as on the website, and a detailed photovoltaics model. And then combined with the photovoltaics model is a battery storage model currently. We might be adding the battery storage model at some point to these other technologies or some other technologies, but we have not done that at this point. The other one that we have probably invested the most amount of resources into is modeling concentrated solar power. SAM is got a number of different concentrated solar power or CSP models within it, including parabolic troughs, power towers, steam ranking cycle, or dish Stirling cycles, and a variety of different working fluids. And we have just a lot of complexity in CSP. We're not going to talk about that too much today, but I will point you to where you can watch more detailed presentations on those technologies. Then we also offer wind, which has been growing in terms of SAM usage of late, geothermal power. We often get the question of geothermal heat pumps. We do not have those included in SAM at this point. Biomass combustion power, and then solar water heating is another technology. On the financial side, we offer financial models to represent the owner's perspective for both residential system owners, commercial system owners, and utility scale system owners. So behind the meter, we have residential systems, commercial systems, third-party ownership. Each one of those has some different inputs that are required and has some different components to each of them. Then power purchase agreements. These are typically more of the utility scale system where you're calculating what the power purchase agreement price needs to be to make the system work. What do you need to get from, say, a utility in the U.S. structure? Single owner, equity flip, sale, leaseback, all of those are structures that allow for the right amount of tax equity to enter the system, enter the financial picture. And then lastly, we have a simple LCOE calculator. So if you're very early on in planning your system and you don't really have any idea about the financing, that might be the one to pick to kind of get you kind of in the ballpark of where you might want to be. Who uses SAM? We have a lot of different users, and we'll talk to that in a second, but lawmakers and utilities, we're working with a number of U.S. utilities right now, analyzing different types of utility rate structures. Developers and engineers is probably our largest group of users to compare technologies, compare sites, configurations, looking at the simulated output, trying to figure out if that system or site will make money for them. We researchers, that's both us here at NREL, we use SAM a lot internally, as well as students, or researchers outside of here, looking at various different analysis questions. If you've seen some of the outputs from NREL, looking at LCOE and some of these other factors around solar, they've probably been using SAM to do the calculations. Then lastly, students, we work with a number of universities and other educational groups. They like SAM because all the students can download it for free, and it's a great way to walk through learning how both solar systems and project financing can work for a renewable energy system. SAM users, got about 35,000 active users in about 130 plus countries. SAM gets started every 2.5 minutes, roughly. We track when people start it. We don't track anything else about their usage of it. And here you can see on the lower left, one of the things that we're excited about is the number of citations that use SAM. That continues to grow every year as more and more researchers and students start to use SAM in their work, saving them hopefully a lot of time as opposed to building their own models. And then you'll note in the lower right that one of the reasons we're excited about doing an ISIS webinar today is because we do have almost 50% of our users are from outside the U.S. already. And we think we have a number of things to offer there, particularly as Anthony's going to talk about a growing amount of international resource data. So we have the SAM website, sam.nrel.gov. We have a support forum there. So if you have a question, that's a great place to go to look for answers to your question, because likely perhaps someone has already asked the same question as you. We have a YouTube channel with many of our webinars and seminars, and once this today's webinar is over, we'll post a link to this webinar as well from there. bi-monthly roundtable sessions, and then email support as well if you have a really detailed question. Now I'm going to talk through a few of the more advanced options in SAM, and you know, at another time, or you can go and look at some of our demos of how to use SAM hands-on. But I'm going to do a more advanced option just to sort of show you the depth that we can get into. One of our more exciting additions of late is the battery model that we've added. This was needed or requested by the solar program here in the U.S. because they're looking at PV plus batteries as a growing option, and how do these systems interact. At the moment, we've got this designed primarily for behind the meter analysis, and what we've done is actually allowed a whole lot of different battery technologies to be represented. Each technology has its own degradation characteristics, capacity characteristics, ramp rate characteristics, and we've tried to represent those in the model. And then obviously the issue of dispatch can be really complicated with batteries. When do you run the battery? How does it fit with your load? What are the rules from the utilities perspective? And then we've done some validation of the battery model. Our detailed PV model, I don't want to go into it too much, but you'll see here that we actually have 4 different module models listed. And part of that is because one of the things we want to do with the SAM tool is provide the latest and greatest models. Commercial tools would pick one of these models and kind of move forward with it. The vast bulk of our users probably use the single diode model because it's linked to the California Energy Commission database, so they can just pick a specific module make from a manufacturer on that list. And then with inverters, we also have 2 different models that you can pick from. We have a number of different options for degradation and how you're treating the radiation. So there's a lot of ways that you can go through this, and we're happy to help you figure out kind of the typical way that you would want to do that, and our default values all kind of take you down a very typical path. 3D shading calculator. This is a relatively recent addition. It allows you to mock up shading for your residential or commercial building typically, and allows you to look at the impact on your performance. SAM allows for really complex utility rate analysis, and James is going to speak in a little bit about how that was used in Mexico. NREL hosts something called the utility rate database, which includes mostly domestic rates, but has a number of international rates that have either come from our analysis or other analyses. And we continue to add new options. You can see a couple of them here that have been added recently. And so this is a real joint effort between a couple of different tools at NREL, the utility rate database and SAM, to provide kind of drop-down click menus to pick the rate that's best for you. And then load data. So when you start talking about batteries and you start talking about utility rates, you really need to be adding load data for commercial buildings or commercial entities as well as residential entities. We have a way here on the left, you can see the entry screen for residential loads to build up a simulated load. And SAM will also take, if you have load data at 15-minute intervals, it will take all of that in as well and allow you to model that in conjunction with the appropriate year of weather data or resource data. So when you put all that together, load data, battery modeling, PV modeling, utility rate data, you put all of that together and you can start to look at really detailed analysis. In this case, looking at in the upper left corner, you're telling SAM when the battery should be dispatching. In the right, you see a standard SAM graphic where the battery meets a portion of the load during the peak of each day. So you can see where the peaks are. You can see what the load looks like. In the lower left, you're looking over the number of cycles of the battery. and the more times you cycle the battery, the faster it degrades. So there's a real set of optimums here for batteries in terms of, oh, I want to use it every day. Well, do you, or do you want it to last more years and just use it when it's most valuable? So those are some of the questions that we look at. And then in the lower right, you can see where SAM decided to replace the battery. Shows up in the cash flow chart there in year, I think, 12 and year 22. You have replaced the battery, and that's that big negative cost out there in the future. I've got one more slide, and then we'll move to questions. But we have a lot of advanced features I want to talk within the desktop application, which you download at the SAM website. You can do parametric analysis, stochastic analysis, both for general inputs and then for detailed O&M. You can do P50, P90 analysis to look at interannual weather variability. We have a scripting language within SAM, and with the scripting language, you can also build macros. For the developers, software developers among you, we have a software development kit with a bunch of wrappers in different languages. PV Watts has a API that you can access. And then just this last fall, we have open sourced the SAM code. So you can get all of the SAM code on GitHub, which is a big change for us after many, many years of not doing that. We worked hard last year to get the code in a mode where it would be ready for other people besides our team to look at. So, and with that, I'll just point to the team. Janine Freeman is the team lead, the project lead. Nick Diorio works a lot on the batteries. I'm involved. I used to be the lead. Steve Janzu, Paul Gilman. Paul Gilman does a lot of the user support, so if you interact with the website. And then we have a couple people, Ty and Mike, who are key to the CSP modeling aspects of SAM. So I'm going to see here if we've got questions. And then we'll let me pop that out here, and I've got a couple of questions. And let's see. Oh, does SAM have any ability to compute estimates of carbon negativity? Probably only possible for biomass. We don't do that right now, and we have the biomass model does not include that at this point. What's the difference between SAM and RET screen? Well, there's a lot of differences. I would say that at a high level, SAM allows you to do a much more complex, detailed performance analysis in particular. I don't recall what RET screen has on the financial side, but I think it's a little more simplified than some of our cash flow models. And the advantage of using SAM instead of RET screen, I think it comes down to kind of what questions you're asking in terms of whether SAM or RET screen would be the right tool for you. I think one thing that RET screen has that SAM doesn't have is it's available in a lot of different languages. There's another question on biochar. I think can the combustion technology be modified to include pyrolysis? I think that's probably true. We haven't done that. I think someone with some good coding background could add that as an additional feature using the open source version of SAM. How does it compare with Homer? Homer's focus is really on kind of picking the right mix of technologies to meet typically a microgrid load. We don't do that. We work with one technology at a time, the exception being you have PV plus storage or you have CSP plus storage. But we don't, SAM doesn't allow you to mix wind turbines with PV systems with diesel generators, and that's kind of more what Homer allows you to do. Can SAM be used for performance evaluation and capacity tests? And
5-minute data.
Oh, 5-minute interval data. Yes. Well, So SAM can be run with 5-minute data. It has been used, particularly in the CSP industry, to do some amount of comparison to measured data. So you do a simulation, you do the measured data, you can evaluate whether or not a plant is performing as anticipated before it was built. So that's kind of a part of the commissioning process. I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of specific examples for that. Is SAM more accurate than PV-SYST in the configuration of tile angle and area needed to install the system capacity? I don't know that we've tested the validation of the tile angle and the ground area. However, I would point you to, we have done detailed validations of SAM versus actual measured data of PV output and compared it to PV-SYST, PV-SOL, and several other PV models that are out there. Those validation reports are on the SAM website. And so in those cases, we compare quite well to both the measured data as well as to PV-SYST. With all of these models, you know, if you get the inputs just right, it's more it's possible to match the measured data. But I think in our case, we tried to do it without going in, knowing all the, without tweaking the inputs. Probability weather data. I'm going to let Anthony talk to some of the weather resource questions. There's a BIPV module question. There are some BIPV modules in the CEC database already. We are going to be adding this year bifacial modules to SAM as a model. And then we will be able to model bifacial models more accurately. So those are not in there at this point. Sub-hourly weather data. So there's a new piece that we're working on where you can really look at taking hourly data and interpolating it to sub-hourly data. That's in particular to match up with load data, which often is at 15 minutes in the US, if not lower than that. And we're going to run out of time. I need to move on to Anthony's presentation. There's a couple questions that are in the weeds here. One on IEC 61853. And can SAM do hybrids, PV plus battery plus grid? Yes, it is connected to the grid, if I'm understanding that question correctly. We do not have heat pumps. Solar cooling systems, we do not have those in there at this point. Is SAM for solar thermal ready? If the question is, does both the solar hot water heating model and all of the CSP models are out and public and ready to be used. Okay, I think we're going to keep going, and we'll continue to answer questions as we go. I'm going to escape out of that for 1 second and view this in full screen, and we'll put that away. Okay, and now I'd like to turn it over to Anthony Lopez.
All right, thanks, Nate. Lots of great questions out there. I can already see that we do not have enough time to answer them all.
No.
So my name is Anthony Lopez. I'm a senior geospatial data scientist here at NREL. The focus of this very short discussion is going to be on solar and wind resource data for use in the systems advisor model. So first, a couple introductory slides here. I just wanted to let you guys know that the focus is primarily on freely available large spatial temporal resource data for use in SAM. So there are a number of private organizations out there who can provide this data as well for charge. Our focus here is just kind of introducing you all to some free data sets out there that you can get your fingers on, instantly and start testing in SAM. Again, given our short time frame here, the focus is on large databases of spatial temporal data, so not annual average data as Nate had mentioned before. We're looking at time series data that cover large swaths of geography. The second bullet here is that this is not an exhaustive list. So we definitely know there are other resources out there that we're probably, or that I'm definitely not presenting on. But we do have at the SAM website, sam.nrel.gov/weather, a number of different resources that you can check out and potentially collaborate and introduce us to. So the focus again here is specifically wind and solar. And then a final note here is that our NREL APIs have been are down for maintenance over the weekend. I've actually just been informed that they're slowly coming back online. So you might have access to some of them currently, but definitely you will have access to them by tomorrow. So in discussing resource data, there's some terminology here that's pretty common that we use, and I thought I'd just quickly go over it, given that the remainder of the slides use this terminology pretty heavily. And so the first is the typical meteorological year. So this is a statistical algorithm for stitching together a single representative hourly profile using many years of data. And generally what this represents is a median year. Now this is in contrast to an actual year, which is data representing the observed or modeled resource for the exact time period. Now there is a number of nuances and things that you should consider before you choose to use one source or another. On that sam.nrel.gov/weather, you'll actually find a little bit more information on that topic. But unfortunately, it's a little beyond the scope of today's discussion, and I say unfortunately because it really is an interesting topic to discuss. So there are a number of descriptive terms that we use when we talk about, in particular, these large spatial temporal resource data sets. One is temporal range. This just refers to the number of years that the data set has available. For example, 1998 to 2015. Temporal interval, this refers to the sample rate. So as Nate had mentioned earlier, annual average, hourly, half hourly, 15-minute, 5-minute data. You have spatial resolution. This refers to the size of the pixels, each containing a time series data. So if you, for example, have a nominal 4-kilometer grid, for each 4 kilometers, you'll have a pixel, and that pixel will have a time series. And then spatial extent simply refers to the coverage of the data, or the geography in which that data covers. So with that, we'll jump into the actual data. And so the first is from the National Solar Radiation Database. This was produced by NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And the NSRDB has actually existed for many years now and has had different incarnations. And the latest one is the physical solar model, now, or PSM. Now, PSM actually covers the Western Hemisphere, and more specifically, it goes up to 60 degrees north latitude, so covering most of Canada, down to 20 degrees south latitude, so covering a good chunk of South America, but not quite all of it. So the PSM has many different years, so 1998 to 2016 that it contains, and has a TMY, or typical meteorological year, available, constructed out of that range of data. The PSM is a half-hour temporal resolution and a nominal 4 kilometers. So the PSM has a number of different ways that it can be accessed. So the first is an interactive GUI. Really, this is kind of a map-based interface where you can pan around, you can enter an address, you can zoom in, and you can click on a grid cell, and you can download the time series data for that specific pixel and year of interest. There also exists an API that you can go to there at the link at developer.nrel.gov. Now, the API is a great use for folks who are using Python or MATLAB or R, or typically accessing this data via scripting languages. or it's really useful for your web developers out there. So, and finally, SAM has actually built-in direct access to the NSRDB. So you could actually just go into the SAM GUI, click download NSRDB data, enter an address, and then it will present you with the number of years that you have to choose from. You can find more information at nsrdb.nrel.gov. This has a number of information there, primarily what you folks are probably interested in. We have validation reports, we have kind of methods reports, and then other interesting links. Go ahead. So the next data set is also from the NSRDB, and this is what we call the SUNY Albany India data set. And this was commissioned in partnership with USAID, and NREL partnered up with some private collaborators to produce this data set. Now this covers all of India, but also good chunks of South Asia, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and a good chunk of Pakistan. So this has a temporal range of 2000 to 2014, and also includes a TMY, and has an hourly temporal interval and a nominal 10 kilometer spatial resolution. Now, given that the SUNY Albany data set is in the same database is in the NSRDB alongside the PSM, you have the exact same access points as the PSM data set. So you see there that you have this interactive ability at NSRDB-viewer. You have the API access, and also you have the direct access in SAM. Okay, so the next data set is actually from the European Commission, and it's called PVGIS. Now, this is kind of this website's been up for a little while, but really it's not a data set in itself, but a collection of databases of different solar resource models. You can see there on the left-hand side, or in the top right-hand side, the map of the extent it covers, and it covers a good chunk of the globe, except for the far eastern part of Asia, as well as Australia, and a small chunk of South America. Now you can see there that the NSRDB is a part of the PVGIS database. We have have a loose collaboration with them, trying to basically just get our information out there and allowing more folks to use and interact with the data. You can also see there are 3 more databases that they pull from that provide the rest of the coverage. Now Nate's actually been testing this for use in the systems advisor model, and we found that the easiest way to interact with this database in SAM is to go to their GUI interface and to download the EPW formatted TMY files, and these work directly in SAM. And you can get at that GUI interface at that URL, the last bullet point. Okay, so switching gears here over to wind resource data set. Now this is a little bit less extensive, and we apologize, we wish we had more free data. And so the wind data sets that I present here are typically stored in the reexplore.org website. Now reexplore.org is a joint effort between NREL and USAID, and really seeks to get a lot of information, geospatial information, spatial temporal information about these different nations out into the public's hands. So definitely go to reexplore.org. We have, I believe, around 15 countries we support. Not all of them, have detailed spatial temporal data that you can use in SAM, but I'll highlight 2 of them specifically that have wind. So the first is Philippines. This Philippines data set is a very high resolution data set that has a TMY, 15-minute temporal interval, nominal 1 kilometer resolution that covers the entire country. Again, you can go to maps.nrel.gov/GST Philippines to go directly to that map-based interface to download, or you can go to reexplore.org and you can learn a little bit more about the initiative and the country itself. Similar effort here, but for India, we have the Renewable Energy Data Explorer for India. This has 1 year of of wind resource at 5-minute temporal interval with a nominal 3-kilometer spatial resolution. Fortunately, we only have this 1 year. This data set was produced primarily for a grid integration study that honed in on this particular year to do our analysis. So you can see here that it doesn't actually cover all of India. Unfortunately, it ends at 30 degrees north latitude, but still a great source for a large chunk of the Indian subcontinent that's freely available to use in the systems advisor model. So just want to leave off with a final note here that you know, we definitely want to hear from you all. If you have additional data sets out there, you can go to the SAM website, to sam.nrel.gov/weather. You can see the data sets that we're listing, but you can also contribute by getting into contact with us and letting us know if you have a data set out there that you think the world should know about and that could be used in SAM. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, and I would just add, this is Nate, that we continue to be working towards finding and providing more hourly databases around the globe. We've got a number of additional, Anthony was mentioning these ready applications, which is country by country providing data. He mentioned Philippines, India, et cetera. And I would note that over the next year or so, we're going to have, I think, between 4 and 6 or 10 more countries coming online, various levels of solar data, wind data, et cetera. We work in collaboration with the World Bank for annual average map data for solar and wind. And then hourly data, as Anthony was indicating, is kind of a little harder to get. takes more effort. And so as those become available, those will be available through a bunch of those different ready applications. And on the SAM weather page, we'll try to continue to augment that with as much information about what's available both on the solar and the wind side as it becomes available. So so the organizer said we're running a little behind, so they encouraged us to keep the questions for the end. So I apologize for anyone who's got a burning question, but we'll get to hopefully a lot of those at the end. And as we saw in the last session after mine, there were a number of questions directly related to what Anthony was going to present. So I think we'll just move right along. And I'd like to introduce James McCall. So take it away, James.
My name is, as Nate mentioned, my name is James McCall, and I'm going to outline some work that NREL has performed in Mexico over the last few years. This work was also done in conjunction with Owen Zinnemann, Alex Asnar, Andrea Watson, and Ricardo Bracco at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So just kind of like a quick rundown of what I'm going to talk about today is I'm first going to go over two case studies. The first being an analysis that looked at the customer impacts from changes to net metering and billing agreements in Mexico. And the second was the potential benefits of PV systems from 3 different perspectives, from PV customers, the Mexican Treasury, and also the environment. Then after that, I'm going to go over just a quick rundown of the International Utility Rate Database and kind of how that was used in our projects and how that is incorporated into SAM. And then I'm going to go over a few just kind of international SAM next steps that have kind of been identified from these other analyses. So just kind of a quick background, just to kind of set the story for kind of some of the Mexico work is Mexico passed their energy transition law in 2015 or LTE that required the energy regulator CRE to develop a fair compensation mechanism for individual distributed generation generators. And the way that we use this in this analysis was actually to model a PV system. This transition law also required SUNY, the Ministry of Energy, to examine the customer benefits of distributed generation in Mexico. So these two analyses kind of built on each other, and that's kind of wanted to go over why we actually started this. Then CRE reached out to NREL to look at the impacts on different compensation mechanisms for DPV customers. And this is really highlighted by the fact in Mexico there are different electricity tariff classes with tiered rates for electricity use within each of the classes. And in these kind of low usage classes, or 1 through 1F, the electricity use is based off of the annual temperature in the city. And then once they use over their 12-month average, the consumer actually gets bumped up into a higher rate tariff class, or DAC. And that is actually a much higher rate, and effectively the Mexican Treasury and this high rate class subsidizes the lower tariff class 1 to 1F to keep these electricity rates low for lower consumers. So that's basically just kind of setting the stories for what actually went into our analyses and kind of what policies were actually driving some of this. So for the first analysis, the compensation mechanism analysis, it was based off of 3 different compensation schemes and determined the payback period for PV systems in 5 different locations. These locations were Tijuana, Monterrey, Guadalajara, Mérida, and Mexico City. And that's basically just highlighting the fact that SAM and also the data sets that Anthony had talked about have kind of wide geographic differentiation amongst Mexico and also other countries. And then it also was looking at 3 different compensation mechanisms, which are detailed in the table below. The first was net energy metering, which is there is no compensation for net excess generation, but then consumers get to actually deduct that from their next bill for anything that they import into the grid. And this is the current mechanism in Mexico right now. The next one is net billing, where the consumer basically exports, when the consumer exports electricity to the grid, they are given the locational marginal pricing for all grid injections, but it's going to be less than wholesale. And then the third mechanism was a buy all, sell all, in which the consumer sold all of their electricity and got paid at that locational marginal pricing level, and then they bought all of their electricity back from the utility. So those are just kind of the 3 different mechanisms. And so, And so basically the inputs into SAM is basically the Mexico electricity tariffs, the PV system costs in Mexico, which we got from developers, the customer consumption data, which was from the local utility, and then also the system size. So we basically used the weather data sets and looked at, based on an average consumer within each of these different tariff classes, what is the PV system side needed to meet 100% of the load for an entire year. So it's on an average basis. And as you can see in the left-hand corner, there is a little chart that's actually taken directly from SAM, and those are the different kind of monthly accounting mechanisms that are actually available in SAM. So the first one is basically compensation mechanism 1, or net metering. The second one is the net billing, and then the last one is kind of the buy all sell all. But it's basically showing that there is numerous different financial mechanisms that can actually be used. And what the results ended up finding was that for all consumers, the net energy metering resulted in a lower payback period. But then net billing was similar to net metering, but also more. And that the buy all sell all rate was actually wasn't actually good for any consumer. So basically between tariff 1, or the low usage, and tariff and also the DAC tariff, there were different benefits. And so what ended up happening was that Mexico kept net energy metering, and they are now looking at a net billing or a buy all sell all. But basically what they wanted to see was, if they were to do this switch, what would be the impact to consumers? And they found that it would actually have a fairly large impact on this change. So the next one is a multi-perspective benefits analysis of installing solar in basically every area in Mexico. So SUNY reached out to NREL to examine these benefits first to solar consumers, and we calculated that using an annual customer bill savings, or the year 1 bill savings, and also the payback period. The second one was to the Mexican government, or the Treasury. There was an avoided subsidy cost payment and decreased tax collection from their value-added tax per kilowatt of DG. So that's looking at, if the Mexican government doesn't have to subsidize these lower rate classes, kind of what is the benefit to them from not having to pay the electrical utility? And then finally, the last one was just the environment. Based on an annual or an average generator in Mexico, what is the avoided carbon dioxide, NOx, SOx emissions per kilowatt and avoided water withdrawal? So this analysis looked at the 8 different tariff classes, 1 through 1F, and also the DAC, for each of the 16 tariff divisions in Mexico, just again to highlight some of the generational and geographical differences. So the SAM puts into this were a little different, but it actually built off of the previous analysis. And so the electricity tariffs and all 16 DAC regional tariffs were built into the IURDB. And kind of in SAM, there's a button on the electricity rates page that you can hit, and you can actually download these directly into SAM. And as long as it's entered into this IURDB, you really don't need to do anything more than that. So it's kind of representing all of these different tariffs. Another input needed for this analysis was some treasury subsidization rates, which they had for the different tariff classes. Needed customer load data by tariff class, the PV system costs in Mexico that we got from working from several developers, and then the average Mexican generation fleet and the system size that is sized to displace 100% of the customer's load. And we calculated generation in each of the tariff divisions, 3 largest cities, and averaged that for the yearly PV generation. So some results for this was that deployment equal to 1% of the total installed generation capacity in Mexico would avoid 1.5 billion pesos of subsidy payments to those lower tariff classes. It would offset nearly 75% of electricity consumed for 680,000 homes, and it would avoid 1.3 million tons of CO2 and 680 million liters of water for cooling. And as you can see in the right in the chart, for the tariffs 1 through 1F, because they are subsidized and because their rates are lower, the payback period is actually quite high, kind of somewhere in the 15 to 20 year time frame. But if you look at the very high electricity user tariffs, these payback period is actually much less. So looking at this, we kind of came to the conclusion that for any of these 1 through 1F customers to actually go and adopt PV, there would need to be some type of policy intervention, and that was what the Mexican government found, was that in order to benefit the Mexican government and the reduced treasury subsidization payments, you would actually need to have incentives for these lower consumers to actually go PV. And finally, I just wanted to go over really quick. So some of the international utility rate database kind of information is developed by NREL for compiling different utility rates. Mostly right now it's used for the United States, but there are some rates for Mexico, Belize, and a few Canadian utilities available. SAM can pull these rates directly in automatically from the website, and in fact is very seamless. And then all relevant rate information, fixed charges, demand charges, electricity price, electricity tiers, et cetera, is uploaded to the database and organized by utility. So it's fairly easy to find. Rates can be added as needed and can occur for countries where NREL performs analyses, or if anyone is interested, they can reach out to us. And you can find the IURDB at the website below. And this is just going over very quickly. This is just a brief kind of screenshot from the IURDB, but it's basically showing that at the top there's the tiered electricity rates, and that's kind of the different rates that are actually put into the model. And then not only that, it shows seasonality and weekend, weekday kind of variability are also in there. And as it stands right now, SAM is not available for use in anything except U.S. dollars, except if you enter all of your information in the currency that you're working with, as in basically the rate up there is actually in pesos, then it basically gives a similar answer. So it's just not going to show up in terms of the correct dollar sign or that. So just finally, just kind of some next steps: the creation of a SAM international website to provide information on past analyses. And as part of this, there's going to be creation of kind of a SAM Mexico example file that has rates and also other standard information already entered into it for the users to use, and both of those are going to be housed there. And then we're basically building upon these analyses to do similar analysis in Peru from the customer perspective, and then also from a displaced diesel generation analysis using SAM. And so that's all I had.
James, this is Nate. I'll just add that we do now have a SAM for international use page on the SAM website, and we will be continuing to update that as more of these Mexican products become published and available. And James had a couple of references there if you're interested in diving deeper into what's going on in Mexico. But I think it's a great example of how SAM can be used along with a bunch of other country-specific data to really inform different decisions being made in those countries. And I think at this point, Joanna, if you can turn the tables over to Sarah Turner, that would be great. And we appreciate Sarah joining us on this webinar today.
Great, thanks Nate and Joanna. I'm going to talk a little bit about another use case for SAM in the international context, specifically India. And this is work that has been done as part of a joint research consortium, and it's at an earlier stage of development, I would say. So I'm more focusing on process as opposed to outputs at this point. So just briefly to introduce myself, I am an assistant policy researcher at the RAND Corporation in Santa Monica and a PhD fellow at the Pardee RAND Graduate School there. And I'm here today to discuss some changes that we have been working on to make SAM easier for users who are interested in India-based project analysis. And so the goal with this was really to provide a prototype for thinking about how SAM financial models could be used for India-specific analysis and to implement some changes that would facilitate that. And I would stress that we don't intend this as the end of the process. We view what we are presenting today as a step along the road to achieving a more broadly internationalized SAM. And this is particularly true in the context of the fact that SAM is now open source, and so you can go in and go to GitHub and get the code and access a lot of these code changes that we have made. So I also want to say that this work owes a debt of thanks to both NREL and the Center for the Study of Science, Technology, and Policy in Bangalore, India. NREL provided really invaluable support on implementing the changes to SAM, and CSTAP was gracious enough to host me 2 summers ago now, I guess, as part of a broader fellowship scholarship program. So what I'm going to talk about really rapidly is an introduction to what Sirius is, because it's sort of an unusual collaborative consortium. The motivation behind this work, how we implemented it and what we implemented, and then a little bit about some ongoing work and applications that we're working through. So Sirius stands for the Solar Energy Research Institute for India and the United States. And the vision of Sirius is really to create an environment for cooperation and innovation without borders to develop and ready emerging revolutionary solar electricity technologies. And what that means in practice is that you have a research consortium that is led jointly by the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado, who are leading a consortium of national labs, government actors, university and academic partners, and industry partners. And they are working along 3 streams to try and improve solar technology deployment. And so there's 3 integrated research areas. These are photovoltaics, solar energy integration, and concentrating solar power. So Solar energy integration is one of the areas where RAND has been most involved, and this includes a techno-economic modeling and analysis component. And specifically, the collaboration between NREL, RAND, and CSTEP to produce what we had been terming basically SAM for India 1.0. So the purpose of this was to modify the existing SAM tool to facilitate ease of use in analyzing India-based projects. And we focused particularly on weather data and financial structures. And this was because we had conducted a survey of current India-based SAM users. And we started this in the middle of 2016, late 2016. Wherein at the time there were about 370, almost 400 India-based users. And these were the two areas that people pointed out as being particularly in need of support with. So that's what we focused on. And in service of that, we made a couple of changes to the system. We expanded the location database that was actually within the SAM program itself. We included some India-specific finance elements, and we added some additional components that allowed rupee-denominated inputs and outputs. And then finally, we developed a wizard walkthrough to help support new users in getting oriented to these changes. So because we've already talked about the locations and the NSRDB, I'm not going to spend much time on this. The only thing we did in addition to that was to pull in some cities into SAM itself, so that instead of having to go query the NSRDB, you could just directly look up a particular city. And so we added 70 cities to the SAM system itself. But if you have a particular location or area you're interested in, the NSRDB itself is a great resource and easily accessible from within SAM. So it sort of depends on what your needs are. With respect to improving the representation of Indian finances, in the financial models, we focus primarily on a single owner power purchase agreement, which is one of the simpler and more straightforward SAM financial models. We made a number of changes to the underlying SAM code that would allow users to conduct analyses that are more closely comparable with what, when we started, were the Indian tariff determination norms. Those have changed, and we're updating our work to accommodate that. So and this is worth mentioning, we conducted this work over a period of really significant change in the Indian solar markets. And so as we're doing some of our analysis now, we're updating the underlying assumptions about capital costs. So that said, the elements that we've changed still remain largely relevant to the policy context. So some of the things we've adjusted include creating a tax holiday or loan moratorium for users, and we made this change into the underlying SAM code. We also allow users to calculate loan terms on a fixed principal declining interest basis. We allow users to specify a receivables reserve and include a return on equity calculation. And these are all things that were not originally part of SAM, but as part of this partnership, we were able to incorporate into the SAM code itself. And so actually, if you go into the GitHub, which you see on this slide, you can find these elements that have been added. You can add them to other financial models, and you have a lot of flexibility in doing so. The other thing we did was we created a financial template file, and this populates baseline costs that are consistent with Indian financing and that are consistent with the Indian policy landscape. So some of these are things like setting the federal income tax rate to the appropriate Indian federal income tax rate and eliminating state income taxes. And so what is nice about that is users can open this template file and have a baseline that is consistent with the Indian landscape for incentives for solar, rather rather than having to adjust a template that was designed and built for the US context. And we've also made these modifications easy to access. So these are within the most recent download from SAM. There's a scripting component, which is kind of an interface access component. And then there's the pv4india.sam file, which is the actual template file that contains the baselines that we have set. So two of the things that we've added to the template file, and not to the template file, to the scripting file, the .lk file, are things that we think are useful for users who are not working in the US context. So James mentioned that if you put all of your prices in a particular currency, you'll get outputs that can be interpreted in those currencies. We wanted to provide an additional function. And so what we did with our scripting file was we actually developed rupee input-output support. And so as you're going through the wizard and going through the walkthrough, you can put in values in rupees. They will be converted to dollars for the analysis, and then the outputs will return in rupees. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the other thing that we've put into this scripting file is a wizard to walk people through a basic analysis, right? And so this introduces them to the tool, helps familiarize them with what SAM offers that is India specific. And this is also stored in the LK script. Users can pull the components that are useful to them from that script and use it for their own purposes. So what we're doing with that is we have a number of planned and ongoing activities that we're working our way through. The first is, as I mentioned before, we are making some updates to the financial assumptions. And at the same time, we're working our way through an application of this model to degradation trade-off analysis. So an analysis of what the cost and degradation trade-offs for panels are in different climate conditions. And if you are, what happens and what are the implications if you are off in your assumptions about what the degradation is going to look like in a particular location. The second thing that we're sort of considering moving forward with is an application of rooftop PV analysis, which would require an extension of this, some of these changes into the residential finance model. But that's future work at this point. So I'm not going to say much more about it. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nate, and we can go through a question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really great. While you've been talking and I was not presenting, we did answer a few of the questions that had come in earlier. Okay, great. So we can continue to answer questions here in the question box that we have. Does SAM include a parabolic trough collector using direct steam generation? I believe the answer is yes. That's correct. And then we answered a couple of questions about the extent of the resource data. And there's a couple of specific ones. One was a question about whether or not we would be including locations north of the 60-degree line, which from a U.S. perspective includes a big chunk of Alaska and also northern parts of Canada. And maybe Anthony wants to take a second to speak to some of the data sets that are up there. We do not anticipate the PSM or NREL's model being used north of 60 degrees at this point. But
yeah, we use the GOES satellites, the geostationary satellites, for the PSM modeling. And once it gets above 60 degrees north latitude, we get too high of a sensor zenith angle. and our models become a little erratic. So that's why we cut it off up there, and we don't have any plans to, at this point, to go north of there. So there are, for those in Canada, NRCan, the Natural Resources Canada, does have some information you can use. And there, if you're interested in Alaska, there are some older data sets, station data sets that are provided through the NSRDB that you can go check those out as well.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Got another question here. Will SAM help us to consider thermal energy storage? And we do have thermal energy storage as a component connected to the concentrated solar power plants. So both single tank, 2-tank, thermocline storage, but one could take the open source code perhaps and kind of model that separately. But at this point, we do not have a freestanding thermal storage component within SAM, although with the growing interest in energy storage, that might be something we want to move forward. There's a question here about soiling losses, and SAM does consider soiling losses. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that the data coming out of India, which Sarah was talking about, soiling can be quite a bit higher for some of the existing systems, at least in India, than we typically assume in the US. And so depending on where you're located, what kind of environment you have, how much it rains, et cetera, soiling can be a really significant issue. And for CSP systems, that's aggravated even more so because of the concentrated nature of the technology. See, real options theory for the assessment of renewable energy projects. We have talked about real options, not with regards to SAM, but through a broader set of analyses in the past in terms of when you would want to invest in a system. And I think this brings up an important point that SAM really sort of stops at the, we call it the plant gate, or at the edge of the system being evaluated. So there are a lot of value streams and decision points related to renewable energy technologies. For example, if you have a PV system, you may want to value the fact that you don't have to upgrade the transformer on your distribution grid, or you may want to value the fact that you're not cycling certain plants on your system as much, or you may want to value the fact that you don't have to build additional peaker plants, et cetera. SAM doesn't really get into those questions. We do use SAM and NREL to be a part of how those questions are analyzed, but SAM really kind of defines itself as being stopping at the edge of the plant gate. We do have a lot of people here working on grid operations issues, grid integration issues, using larger tools such as Plexus, which is commercially available, grid production cost model, or our own NREL's READS model, which is a capacity expansion model looking into the future. And SAM is a part of those activities, but it is not able to answer those questions on its own. So, and let's see, I think we got another multi-tube absorber model. I am not sure. I think there's a detailed question here on a particular CSP technology, multi-tube absorber with a linear Fresnel prototype. We do have a linear Fresnel model in SAM, and with a secondary reflector. So I think the answer to that is yes, but I encourage you to read the CSP linear Fresnel documentation to get more details about that question. While we wait for another question to come in, I would just add that, someone asked about the difference between SAM and RET screen earlier. One thing I'd add to that, which I think I failed to mention at the time, was that RET screen's available in many, many different languages. And SAM at this point is really just available in English. All our support's in English, our videos are in English, etc. So I think, again, depending on what kind of question you're asking, that RET screen might be a better place for you to start, depending on your language requirements. They've worked very hard at making it multilingual. Question, could you please tell me if I can use SAM for a hybrid system, example, PV plus a generator in isolated sites? So that's an interesting question. I think basically the answer is no. SAM is not typically what you would go to do a microgrid type analysis of a PV and a generator. I think what you can do in SAM, what some people have done is, for the same location, you can set up a PV system as one case in SAM. You can set up a wind system as another case in SAM. You could set up, and then you would have to post-process and maybe add those technology outputs together, and the net would have to come from a generator. So you could see how you could do that. But again, that's kind of after the fact or post-processing in SAM. There's a question for James. I'll just read it. PV off-grid rural program includes the installation of 1 kilowatt per home or family? Question mark.
Yeah, I don't think that if that's a program that is currently looked at, I don't think that we looked at that, but kind of our analysis looked at just specifically at an average consumer class or an average consumer for each of the tariff classes, and especially for most of the smaller electricity users of the tariff 1 through 1F, they were only installing around a 1 or a 1.5 kilowatt system to cover a lot of their load. So if that doesn't answer your question, please just type back in.
Great. The next question is, do we have a utility scale financial model for Mexico updated with the low price basis obtained from the latest Mexico bids? I was just listening to a podcast about the Mexican bids the other day, and it's pretty exciting and very low prices. We do not have any of the details. We don't know anything more here than what's available publicly elsewhere. And typically our templates and our project files and the defaults that we have in SAM, we try to be really clear, and it's listed on the website where we get those default values from. And in general, we have US specific default values that are published, recently published NREL reports. So we don't always have the latest and greatest and lowest cost values in there. And for Mexico, we don't have a task at this point to create SAM template files with those low cost bids or data that would be available for that. And again, a lot of the cost data in particular, of course, is confidential. CSP tutorials, again, I would really encourage people to start with the getting started with SAM guide in the help file, and there's a lot of information and publications on our CSP models in particular, and we do have some webinars as well for that. This question on an India-specific clear sky model. Does that mean anything?
Consider an India-specific clear sky model and the concept of estimate solar radiation. So I believe the model used was a semi-empirical model, the Perez model, for the irradiance calculation in India. And as far as clear sky is concerned, I am vague on the details, but we did have some interesting troubles accurately modeling the aerosols in the beginning. which caused us to do a second release of the Indian solar resource data set. So yes, we did consider local aerosols.
Okay, great. It's a question for James and for Sarah. Can we find any articles or documents about your case study for more details? I'll give it to James first, and then Sarah, I'll let you chime in.
For the first analysis, looking at the different compensation mechanisms, that is currently being published right now, and it should be forthcoming fairly soon. For the second analysis that we looked at, the source is actually on the slides, so whenever the organizers pass that on, that should be located in there. Yeah.
So for us, our analysis is still ongoing, and so the plan is to put it out in public in a published form as soon as it's done. But we're still working on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. Here's a good question. Is it possible to input hypothetical inverter performance curves into SAM, or do you need to choose from existing products? That's a great one, because we've worked hard to allow someone to put in a simple efficiency PV module, for example, as well as a hypothetical inverter curve. So you do not need to pick from a list of existing products. And I think that's important to know, and I'm glad someone raised that question, because from a research perspective, we're always interested here at NREL in modules that don't exist on the marketplace yet, or if we could increase the efficiency of a PV panel by 10%, what's the reduction in the LCOE? So we ask those kinds of questions a lot here, and SAM is capable of thinking about hypothetical modules, hypothetical inverters, hypothetical CSP components, hypothetical wind turbines, etc. So that's a great question. And is there a database available for South American regions like French Guiana?
Yes, so in the NSRDB PSM dataset, we do cover French Guiana. We do go, I believe it's down to 20 degrees south latitude. So you're going to basically cover almost all of Brazil, down south to Brazil. So.
Yeah, and is the lower end also due to the satellite, Anthony?
Yeah, so that's basically where our half-hourly information stops existing. So, so that's where our field of view kind of stops.
So are we aware of anyone, because I know we get, from the CSP side, we get the question, because we only go about halfway down Chile.
Yep.
And we get a question about CSP plants for mining areas in southern Chile.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of a data resource for that area, for the southern part of South America?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a high-resolution spatial temporal resource database, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist out there.
Okay. But that's great. That's so if people have information on that, we would love to hear about it. Do you know of other modeling tools that also accept hypothetical inverter curves? That's a good question. I believe that with, in fact, I know with PV-Syst, you can modify the inverter curves as well. And so it allows you to do that. You can also do that somewhat to model staged inverters and inverter banks as well. So there's a number of different options that you can have for that. So question about how do you know that you need to modify the financial inputs to fit the characteristics for other countries, especially if you don't have a great grasp of the basics of financing to begin with? And I think that's an excellent question. On our SAM International page, we point to a couple of the changes that we've made. I think Sarah did a good job of summarizing some of the changes we made for India. And I think it's very difficult to know some of the tweaks that we make to the models from the financial perspective are result in small changes to the LCOE. So you might want to use the SAM models and then just kind of assume that there's perhaps a bit more uncertainty with the results for your particular country. And a lot of times the changes can be in the area of depreciation. That's one where policies are sometimes implemented in the area of depreciation. And also, I think, particularly in countries where renewables are an emerging technology, the cost of financing is highly variable. So you can say, geez, I've got all the costs down. I know what I can buy these components for, but you know, the banker wants like 15% or 18%. Some of these costs of financing are very high in the early stage of a market and then drop as the banking community and the finance community becomes comfortable with renewable energy technologies in that country. And now with it being more of a global thing, maybe those numbers are starting off lower to begin with. So the cost of financing is often the biggest driver in the levelized cost of energy for a number of these technologies. And so getting that right is probably going to get you most of the way there, whether you've got, you know, some small part of the tax bill quite figured out, might not be as impactful in your final results. So so I would worry most about the cost of financing.
Mm-hmm. And just to add on that too, I think that especially from a few of our analysis sides, that was often kind of a lot of the longest time period was actually getting those accurate cost, like basically loan assumptions, financing assumptions. So I know that probably, you know, even probably kind of using the, as Joanna had mentioned, the, you know, ICE's kind of like LinkedIn page might be a good place to start for that as well, kind of to see if there's other people who work in those countries.
Great. So I think we're going to wrap up for questions. We maybe have time for one more. I'm not seeing any more coming in. And we'll throw it back to Joanna. Joanna, do you want to
Yes.
end us now?
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much. And I just want to say how impressed I am with that Q&A session. I think you guys answered 99% of those questions. That was excellent. So well done for that. And thank you, the audience, for submitting all those really, really interesting questions. And yes, please do continue the discussion on our social media channels. We have a LinkedIn group, and it would be great to connect with you there and continue the discussion. So I'd like to thank our panelist speakers officially and formally now for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. We very much appreciate them volunteering their time and coming on to this ISIS webinar and sharing the information with all of us this evening. Contact panelist speakers for further information about what they've presented today. You can have a look at their presentations for their contact details. So please contact them directly. You can download the presentations for the next 24 hours on the website. After that, it is a members only benefit. So if you're a member, you can log in and there you'll see all the presentations. The next ISIS webinar will take place on the 14th of March, and it's a completely different topic. It's a Solar Academy and IEA SHC Solar Academy webinar on price reduction of solar thermal systems. So I invite you all to join us for that webinar also. If you use social media, we encourage you to connect with us to continue the discussion and stay tuned to the status of renewables. Last but not least, thank you to the audience for joining us in such large numbers today, and we look forward to welcoming you at the next ISIS webinar. I'm going to set up the recording. It usually takes a couple of hours, but it should be ready soon on the ISIS website and also our YouTube channel. If you have comments or feedback, we welcome you to share this with us so that we can continue it to improve these webinars for you. Please participate in the survey that pops up at the end of this webinar, or send your feedback to the email address public.relations@isis.org. That's it for me. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.